delighted today to have Joanne Sulman with us. She's going to be talking about social work with groups. She has worked for more than 50 years with social work with groups and has been a long-time social worker in inpatient social work at the Mount Sinai Hospital. She also is a research affiliate with my institute, the Institute for Life Course and Aging at the University of Toronto, and she's currently doing research on people with cancer of the esophagus. Thanks so much for joining us today.
I'm delighted to be here as an older adult and trained as a social group worker. This is exactly where I should be right now.
When you talk about social group work, what is it?
Although many social workers are unaware of this, social group work, or social work with groups, is actually social work's own method of working with groups. So where did that come from? And I'll reference Margot Breton here. In the late 19th and early 20th century, social group work evolved from early settlement houses, outdoor education, camping, and labor unions. And from these roots, which are all activity-based, social group work became a democratic, non-hierarchical, social justice and strengths-based practice that uses purposeful activity and mutual aid. And the tools that a social worker uses with groups reflect social group work's ethical framework and purposes. So let's look at these tools. The first one is democracy and social justice. Social group work models anti-oppressive, strengths-based practice based on diversity, advocacy, social action, and as Breton describes it, the creation of community in every group. So, still talking about democracy and social justice, the first core value in the standards of practice for social work with groups states, in group deliberations, no one person should be more privileged in a group than another, not a worker, not a group member, or the agency director. So social group workers are pretty serious about non-hierarchical practice. The second tool I want to mention is mutual aid, and this concept is central to social work practice with groups. The group provides connection, a space for the sharing of experience, and a feeling of inclusion in a community of people who are not only all in the same boat, but they're going somewhere together. Through mutual aid, social work groups provide social engagement, support, therapeutic helping relationships, skill development, and the accomplishment of individual, group, and social action goals. The third tool that I want to highlight is non-deliberative practice. As I mentioned earlier, the roots of social group work are all activity-based. Ruth Middleman in 1968 describes nonverbal methods in group work, and Norma Lang developed non-deliberative practice theory. This uses active engagement such as play, art, games, music, drama, dance, and role play to unlock the range of ways that people can express themselves, communicate with others, and discover their strengths. So in these ways, they find solutions that are not exclusively talking or deliberating. Norma Lang's directive is do, then think. The fourth tool that I'm selecting is strengths-based practice. Dominique Steinberg, who has written extensively on mutual aid, says that people bring all manner of information, knowledge, and wisdom and experience to the group. And one way of harnessing their strengths is by calling on that fund. Lang says the experiential activity employs a self-determining, self-directed process. In effect, non-deliberation acts as a worker of the self. Breton says every time social workers evoke what she calls the strength in us mutual aid dynamic, they help the group members experience power. This is quintessential strengths-based practice.
Does social work with groups work with all ranges of older adults?
Yes. Social work with groups or social group work is a powerful tool in working with older adult populations, from active seniors to the frail, elderly, and their caregivers.
So could you just tell us, how is social group work different from other social work practice?
To summarize what we mentioned at the beginning, social group work is one of the historic foundations of social work. It's a democratic, non-hierarchical, strengths-based practice grounded in social justice that employs purposeful activity and mutual aid. And the purpose is for helping. Casework, another foundational component of social work, developed in Britain from the mid-19th century charity organization societies and was exemplified in America by Mary Richmond's 1917 text, Social Diagnosis, which adapted the medical model of study, diagnosis, and treatment to friendly visiting, case studies, and social welfare. Much of direct clinical social work practice today is derived from this hierarchical, medical-based dyadic casework tradition that, despite a person in environment perspective, generally locates the problem in the person who needs therapy, rather than in societal problems that profoundly impact individuals, groups, and communities.
What are some examples of social group work with older adults?
Well, over 90% of older adults in Canada live in private households. The majority are reasonably independent and are able to access group programs in the community. These programs range from fitness, crafts, choirs, motorcycle clubs. In fact, groups for active older adults are really no different from the types of social activity groups that most people grew up in. But when older adults are faced with major health challenges or life transitions, such as retirement, bereavement, social isolation, or the need for assisted care, social group work can make a difference. These groups can provide peer support, they can help navigate losses and struggles, and help people acquire new roles and ways to cope. For older adults with cognitive and physical challenges in day programs or residential care settings, sharing reminiscence, favorite music, chair fitness, and other activities can energize a group and its members. For adults who are elderly with severe physical and cognitive impairment, reintroducing them to a group-like setting can reinforce social competency. And the social group work literature has numerous examples. And the best collected reference I can point to is the Journal of Social Work with Groups. I want to tell you a little story from Catherine Papel. She's one of the founding editors of Social Work with Groups. She talks about her own personal experience with the aging process and says that in sharing their uniqueness with peers, elderly people can also find their commonalities with others and can feel supported and perhaps even strengthened. And that sharing uniqueness makes commonality possible. It makes possible mutuality, mutual aid. As a sample, let me mention 3 examples. In the first example, Marilyn White Campbell and her colleagues in 2016 described a very interesting group held in an art gallery with older adults who struggled with mental health and addictions. The group was designed as an 8-week psychoeducational group with a discussion format. Intriguingly, in the journal article, the authors contrast what actually happened in the group with possibilities of what could happen if social group work principles were added, including a greater knowledge of Norma Lang's non-deliberative practice theory. For example, They describe an early session when the group viewed a painting by William Kurelek, a Canadian artist who had experience with his own mental illness. The painting, titled The Bachelor, described the artist's small, cluttered apartment with the artist himself sitting in a chair sketching. The members of this group could relate to the small, cluttered surroundings and how often when they were depressed, things easily became cluttered and unkempt. But reflecting about the group process for their article, the authors suggested that art supplies might have been provided and the group members might have been asked to imagine they were artists and to make a picture of themes from their own lives. The second example that I think might be helpful is about caregiver support groups. The authors reviewed the literature on these groups and found that they do help family members recognize the importance of the work that they are doing. They enhance personal competence and self-care. They increase the use of formal support services, and through mutual aid, they foster the development of a sense of connection that is empowering. But they stated that the caregiving burden can be even greater for family members from non-dominant cultures because of the lack of access to culturally appropriate services. In their own study of Chinese family members who had attended a support group, the members described the tentative way that people shared their experience with each other. Quote, as newcomers, they would listen to other people talk. Then they just gradually start to take little steps towards talking and sharing their own experiences. In general, the benefits in this group were similar to those reported in mainstream groups. But there was an important cultural difference: the lesson of speaking out or advocating for their family members and for themselves. Now, this third and last example is the one that taught me the most about the power of social group work. It's about a group for frail, cognitively and physically impaired older adults in an acute care teaching hospital who are waiting for placement in alternate levels of care. Even today, acute care hospitals in Canada are concerned about ALC patients. The problem for the hospital is that the care needs of these patients are generally incompatible with the hospital's goals. Imagine the problem in the 1980s when it literally took from several months to 4 years to find available long-term care. And at that time, there were no in-hospital programs. These elderly adults were confined to bed or sat in the halls in their wheelchairs, calling out for attention from staff or visitors. The nursing unit administrator on the service asked me if there was anything I could do to help. My initial reaction, quite frankly, was that any possibility for group participation in this population would be unrealistic. But because I was a group worker, I started a group. By pulling together family members, other social workers and students, occupational therapists, volunteers, and porters, we were able to bring all the potential members to a classroom for the first group. Some of these new group members had spent most of their days in hospital expressing agitation and despair. But as soon as they were brought together into a circle, it was dramatic. Their cries stopped, and they responded with long-buried social cues. The simple act of reintroducing these compromised older adults to a group-like setting reinforced social competency and enhanced interpersonal functioning. Long-term open-ended group was finally formed, composed of about 10 members. The group's goals were to prevent deterioration of functioning, to stimulate recovery of some social skills, including peer interaction. Program activities included exercises adapted for a wheelchair, active games, including bowling with plastic pins and beanbags, and basketball with beanbags and a waste paper basket, movies, music, simple crafts, and indoor gardening. These non-deliberative activities were the palette for resocialization and remotivation. One indicator of the success of the group is that a number of patients who had refused rehabilitation efforts before coming to the group were able to start and maintain treatment programs. So ultimately, in conjunction with occupational therapy, the group eventually ran 5 days a week with permanent staff members from both social work and OT, who also advocated within the hospital. They got on the agendas of high-profile committees to take social action to improve the care of long-stay patients throughout the system. That's social group work.
Is there anything else you want to share about social work with groups?
Well, Esme, one thing that I should mention is that the method, social work with groups, is underutilized in work with older adults and with all populations today, because in the 1970s, most schools of social work stopped teaching social group work as a distinct method. Schools believed that a generic practice would train generalist social workers to deliver services to individuals, families, groups, and communities using direct counseling and indirect advocacy skills. The first casualty of this shift in social work education was social group work. Why? Educators teaching generic social work tended to be early adopters of group practices from other professions, such as group psychotherapy, cognitive behavioral therapy, and manualized educational short-term groups. Despite the fact that social group work methodology could enhance the effectiveness of all these other group practices, the speed of the loss of the method was so rapid that a few years later, in 1979, social group workers founded their own association to preserve social group work. And because of the division between micro, direct small group practice and macro community social policy, the actual method was lost to most social workers, except those previously trained in it, or those who were able to connect with members of what is now called the International Association of Social Work with Groups. Fortunately, IASWG continues to be a vibrant organization for social workers who want to develop or improve their social group work skills.
Thank you, Joanne, for such a fascinating overview on social group work. We really appreciated it.
Thank you very much for this opportunity.